It is being recorded. All right. So we talked about turbo normalized or turbo normalizing and an altitude engine, which I don't like that term. So that is a type of engine. When I say type of engine, you know, the engine's not necessarily any different than any other engine. They tend to be a low compression ratio engine. Other than that, it's the same old engine. You just got stuff bolted on the outside. So a type of engine that uses a turbocharger, turbocharger or supercharger, remember, a turbocharger is something driven by exhaust gas, and a supercharger, something that is belt or gear driven, or supercharger, to generate sea level pressure in.
Will it always be sea level pressure, or could you adjust it to a different pressure setting?
Well, you could adjust it to do whatever you wanted to. You could adjust it to give you more. It's like, yeah, I bought an aircraft and it was turbo normalized, but you know what? I own a flat blade screwdriver, so now it's ground boosted. You could do that. All it takes is a screwdriver and adjust the pressure regulators on it, and it would be. But you don't want to do that. So if it's designed and operating properly, it will never ever give you more than sea level pressure.
Okay, that makes sense.
To generate sea level pressure in its intake manifold, and that will be up to its critical altitude. Critical altitude, and I'll define critical altitude for you. So, what is critical altitude? Critical altitude is defined as the altitude at which an engine can no longer produce sea level horsepower. All right, August, for 2 points. What is that for a normally aspirated engine?
I thought he wasn't here.
Well, I see a square. August, you with us? August going once.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I had something I had to attend to.
Oh, so you're here but not paying attention. I got it.
My apologies. I actually just got back.
All right. This is why I guess I don't call on people. It just embarrasses them.
Oh, well, hey, it's all good. My fault.
Christian, can you answer it?
Yeah, and I'm still figuring this thing out. Can you tell me if my attention thing is?
I have no idea. It takes me about a few minutes to look it up. I don't want to take the time for that.
Okay, for sure.
Yeah, it's.
But I'm trying to get the mic, or not the mic, trying to get the video thing fixed.
Oh. Yeah, video problems too. Oh no, that's not. Okay. Well, who can answer the question?
It will be at sea level.
It'd be at sea level is correct. So one, in a normally aspirated engine, an And remember, normally aspirated engine means it has no turbocharger, no supercharger. In a normally aspirated engine, that altitude is anything over sea level. So in my little Cessna 150, my critical altitude is
1 foot.
1 foot or 1 inch. All right.
Well,
Area
technically,
sinking.
it would be anything over where your engine sits on the airplane, because no matter what, it would be above sea level.
That is true. So
Or you
my
could be in
engine
the
is
desert
actually,
below sea level, and then you could be flying at 20 feet, you know.
that's right. Now, if you want to go down to Death Valley and fly real low to the ground, then I guess you're going to get more horsepower.
Like 200 feet below sea level.
All right. But you have to be flying close to the ground, right? In a supercharged engine, that altitude, that is the critical altitude, is much higher. 10,000, 15,000 feet, something like that. Depends on the engine and the manufacturer and how they have it set up. Okay, so we've done ground boosted, which means it is boosted over sea level. Turbo normalized, which means that you just trick the engine into thinking it's at sea level for a much higher period of time. So if the engine had a thought process, it would think, hey, look at me, I'm at sea level and the air's hot, and I'm at sea level and the air's a little hotter, and I'm at sea level and the air's getting even hotter, and I'm at sea level. Now the air is really hot, and now it's like, okay, now I'm at 1,000 feet and the air is pretty hot, and at 2,000 feet and the air is pretty hot. It would do that. And at the point where that engine realized that it was no longer at sea level is what we call critical altitude. So that's for a supercharged engine, or that's an engine that is not so supercharged engine. I could put just a little bit, I could have wrote instead of supercharged in a non-turbo normalized, non-turbo normalized. So if it's, and I hate to use triple negative, not a non-turbo normalized, that is much higher. All right, D. I'll just bring D down to here. D. All right, supercharging. Remember, there's a supercharger and supercharging. So those are two different things. So I'll do supercharging and supercharger. So if I say supercharging or manufacturer, that is boosting the manifold pressure above 30 inches. All right, and how they do that? It is done with a compressor that is gear, belt, or exhaust gas driven. So just some sort of compressor. So supercharging means it has just some sort of compressor. And the reason why I tell you that is because Lycoming tends to do it this way. Continental, they just say, well, it's turbocharged. And they don't have a distinction in their name. As we're Lycoming will change it. They will say, Lycoming, one of them says, you may have a turbocharged. And then they'll say, but you'll have a turbo supercharged. Turbo supercharged. So it's the distinction between the two. C-H-A-R. So one is, so this supercharging is here. It's in the super over here. So super means more than. All right, so there's supercharging, the ing, that's a thing that's done. And then I could say a supercharger. So supercharger. That's an item. So a supercharger, that is a gear or belt-driven compressor. Now, it just so happens that whenever you bolt on a supercharger, by definition, it's a gear or belt-driven compressor that boosts manifold pressure above 30 inches. You don't have a supercharger that does normalizing, supercharger normalizer. There's no such thing. When you add these superchargers, you're doing a compressor, you're boosting it. Now, I will say that, and then I will say we could take a look at like radial engines, and you guys know that radial engines have an internal supercharger, and the Lycoming R680, that's a 9-cylinder radial engine. If you were to take it apart and look at it, you would see an internal supercharger, but it's not. It just looks like one and tastes like one and it acts like one in all respects, except it doesn't boost anything. So if it doesn't boost anything, then it's not a supercharger. It's just called an impeller. And all it's there for is to mix the fuel in the air. It's like you take the same thing in the like the 985, the Pratt & Whitney, or the one, the mock-up that we have, the cutaway in our lab, and you spin the crap out of that impeller, now you start boosting the air up, and it's a supercharger. So you either have an impeller or a supercharger. There is no such thing as a supercharger normalized engine. So you just don't get into that. It's only something that you do with turbochargers. All right, so, okay. So I have my pictures that might make more sense. So let me pull this over here. We'll say, start with this one, current slide. So there we go. So this particular engine it's a centrifugal supercharger out of a Bristol Centaurus radial aircraft engine. And I found it on the internet. So whoever took this picture, I love it. So, and you can see that, well, here's all the gear mechanism that would be in the accessory case. And somewhere in the middle, you have this impeller, which spun fast enough becomes a supercharger. And what kind of compressor is that?
Centrifugal.
Centrifugal, says it right there, centrifugal. So you have a centrifugal, air comes in the middle, it is spun to the outside, compressed, and goes around to the cylinders. And you should kind of realize, based upon our studies with the pressure carburetor, that really when the fuel and air is coming in here, it's fuel and air. So the fuel and air is already mixed at the pressure carb, put into here, compress, spun out, compress. So there's an integral supercharger. This is this is a 2-stage out of an Allison, because it says so on the bottom, a P63E. This version, the internal blower stage compressed air prior to fuel mixing. So, so as you can see by the wording down there, you have 1, 2. And just like hopefully you learned with Phil, whenever you do 2-stage compression, you have a big one, which is your primary, which does the first stage. So this first stage, the air comes in, it's compressed. You have now compressed air up in here. You have right in here, it's showing the induction of the fuel into the air. So fuel and air is going to go through your second stage compressor and then off into the engine. So this is not a turbocharger. They are driven off gears. Therefore, it is a supercharger. And then oh, this one's funny. Where did hang on. I had a note on this one.
Is that second supercharger driven off a gear as well?
Yep. Everything here is gear driven. No exhaust gas driven. This is Dago Red. I don't even know what became of this one, but I wrote this because it was really cool. Dago Red, for example, gets a 75 PSI boost with the manifold pressure between 140 and 150 inches of mercury.
Good Lord.
That thing's running a 1,650 cubic inch V12 Rolls-Royce Merlin engine.
Isn't that what's in the P51?
The V12 outlet, yeah, but this thing is being boosted. I don't know what the P51 stock is, but that's what they're running on this thing.
Ooh.
Okay.
Sorry.
And so this is another type. This is something that you would see like on your Mad Max or your, hot rod, dragsters, that kind of thing. So this is an actual, what we call in the automotive world is a blower, which would normally sit on top of the engine. And I was just thinking I don't know, somebody asked me at one point, do they make any like blowers for aircraft? I'm like, I've never seen or heard of one. And then I found this online. It's the G3i Supercharger. It's got a 20,000 foot critical altitude. So I believe this is a bolt-on item that you can get for your home build, which means you're not following the rules. You do whatever you want. So you can buy this thing, and you can see up here that it's belt driven. So that belt's going to come up, drive off of this is called a starter ring gear support. This is actually the starter ring gears right here. This is called the support because it's really a two-piece unit. Sort of. I mean, say sort of because you can change the gear, but you got to know how to do it. And once that gear's on there, you don't get it off unless you cut it off. So anyway, so it's going to drive through here, down through this belt system, and it's going to turn. This is what the inside looks like. So it's going to turn these two impellers, which is going to be pretty much a constant displacement type of pump, and pump the air right around. And oops, it's going to go up this way, in, up, around, and up now. So there's what it looks like. So I don't know. I think I looked this up, or somebody did last time, how much it cost. I do not remember.
Looks
Hey,
expensive.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed you in aircraft terminology talk about the supercharger and turbocharger in how many inches above sea level,
Right.
or mercury.
Yeah.
Is that how it is? Because I know in automotive terms you'd say PSI, right?
Yeah. I don't know. How many of you guys have a turbocharger on your car that reads in PSI? Does anybody have one that can?
I have one on my
MJ.
truck.
Okay. So what kind of PSI are you looking at?
17 and a half.
Okay. So, but is that 17 and a half above? So you're getting about a 3-inch boost, or you're getting a 17-inch boost?
That's the thing. Like at idle, it's at 0, and if you're on it, you get 17 and a half, and that's
Okay,
max.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So if we think that through, and depending on where it is, at idle, you're at a vacuum. So you're going to be at about, I don't know, 14 inches of mercury. So I don't know what that would be in PSI, but in PSI, it's a vacuum. So it kind of depends on, well, I shouldn't say it's a vacuum. It depends on where it is a vacuum, but how they're reading it. So that's an interesting point. So.
Oh, I get it. So, yeah, I know what you mean. So, in automotive terms, you're like 14 inches below sea level, I guess.
No. So oh yeah, I'm sorry, at idle. But if we want to talk PSI, all right, like with Mark's truck, it goes up to what, 17, I'll say 17 and a half. I don't remember the exact number. So the question is it boosting 17 and a half? So we know that 14.7 is standard atmospheric pressure, same as 30 inches, roughly. So if you go to, what was it, 17 and a half? So are you getting three and a half inches of boost? Probably not getting 17 inches of boost. That would seem like a lot, but I could be wrong on that. So is where in the aircraft world, we would just read it in inches of mercury. In the car world, they read it in PSI, which I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. I think I get it. Because you're looking at 14.7 being the even scale.
Yep. That would be considered 0 or even. Heath says this is a bolt-on. If you guys see that, this GI Supercharger, it's $12,500. That is really cheap for something on an airplane.
You should get it for yours, Kevin.
I really should. They make it for no 200 because that's a Lycoming engine. I'm sure it'd be legal. I could boost that thing to 105 PS, 105 horsepower, and you watch me go. Paint would be flying off the leading edges.
I just looked it up for my truck. It says that the boost gauge reads atmosphere plus boost. So like mine reads 0 at idle.
Okay, so run that by me again. 0 at idle. So what is your max PSI?
Like 30 if I'm really on it.
So that's atmospheric plus 30 PSI?
Mm-hmm.
Holy
That's
crap,
what
that's
it says
a lot.
online. I just looked it up. I was curious.
And what car is that?
Duramax diesel.
Dang. So that would be the same as 14 plus 20.
Mm-hmm.
So
14.
34. That's really pushing
plus
some
30.
air.
14 plus 30.
Yeah. Oh no, 20. You said 20 inches, right? Or 20 psi.
30 psi.
I
30
think
psi.
you said 30. Yeah.
Holy crap.
Whew.
That's
You borrow
crazy
that
coming out of
turbo.
a pickup because like a Cummins engine in a semi generally boosts out at 40, and that's if you hit over 40, it overspins and you're done for.
Dang.
Those turbos spin at like 30,000 RPM.
Yeah, we're going to talk about those. These things are screaming. And of course, it depends on the size. But okay, so let's see, back to this. So hopefully everybody understands, though, we're aviation. And so we always talk in inches of mercury, knowing that 30 is your sea level, and then that's how you manage it above that. We don't really go with PSI.
Basically, we're speaking altitude, right?
Yeah, we're talking about altitudes, more or less, because everything is displayed that way with the altimeter and stuff. Okay, so this is my supercharger. Remember, that could either be internal, driven off gears and such, or external. This is pretty rare, very rare to see something like this. But then again, it's really, really rare. I have never, ever seen a supercharger on a horizontally opposed engine. Never seen it. The only superchargers I've ever seen in aviation myself are this type, internal, something you can't even see. It's just not these external ones. But anyway, I found that. So, okay. And we can get rid of this. All right. So supercharger. And let's see. So that was, I showed you two types. We had the internal, we could say maybe multiple stage. And then I showed you the external belt driven. There's some really old movie where I think it was like Mad Max or some stupid thing where he had some sort of car with one of these big blowers on the top, but he had it hooked to a switch where he could turn it on or off. And that always bugged the heck out of me, because it seems to me when you're looking at a blower like that, it doesn't have a bypass on it. So I always thought that wouldn't work. Getting way off the subject here, but you see. So if air is coming in, oops, has to come in and through here and up in this case, and there it goes, comes in here and around. There's no way around. So if this thing isn't spinning, it looks to me like it would block the air. I don't know how it would get around. That does not make sense.
It would almost have to have like a double intake with the supercharger being on a clutch.
Yeah, it was, and it was like a clutch like you'd see on an air conditioning system. All right, so we had the external belt driven. Like I said, I've never seen this in aviation use, and I'm just going to say it's the Roots type. And you'll talk more about the Roots type blower when you get into cabin pressurization. There are actually some aircraft that use some of these things, old aircraft. All right, so then we get into the turbocharger, which is where we're really going to spend most of our time here. And a turbocharger is an exhaust gas driven compressor.
Excuse me, Kevin. Do you need, on the supercharger, do you need to cool the air? Because when you compress air, it's became more temperature, right? It's became.
Okay. Do you need to cool the air? Well, it really helps. And when you do cool the air, that's called an intercooler, and we'll talk about those. But intercoolers add restriction, and restriction means you have to boost more, and you have more weight, and so they add complexity. But you can see, you can't see with this supercharger. All these supercharging, so there is no intercooler. There's no cooler between here to here. You guys know how this works. the carburetor is going to bolt, well, it's right back here. And so air is going to come in, goes through the blower, supercharger, right up into the oil sump, into the intake tubes, and right off into the cylinders. Boom, in, down, done. So nothing. We look at this type, we could put some sort of intercooler right in this section, but it doesn't appear to have one. And I've never seen one on this one. I'm not an expert on this one by a long shot. But I don't see any intercooling at all. So the air just gets much, much hotter.
Mhm.
That can cause detonation, right?
It well does eventually. Now, okay, so here we can look at this one. This is, you can tell by the covers that way. It's, the way Continental did this is what, a 550. And this is right here, looks just like a oil cooler, but it's not. You're an air through it. So this has twin intercoolers. There's an intercooler here and on that side. So this is a turbocharged system whereby these are the intake plenums. So you can see the turbocharger here. It's probably a twin turbocharged engine. I don't know, I just stole it from the internet. So you're going to have the exhaust is going to come through here where this red cap is. It's just capped off right now for whatever purpose. It looks like it's a trade show and they capped it off. So exhaust is going to come through here. It's going to drive the exhaust. The compressor is going to spin up. I'm sorry, suck in air through here. That's the air inlet. Exhaust is over there. So suck it up through here, spin it through here. It's going to go through an intercooler on both sides, probably. Follow it through. It's going to go right into the throttle body, which you know what looks like now on a Continental. It doesn't have a venturi at all. So it's going to go through there and then right down into the cylinder. And then here is the fuel injection line right there. Coming off the fuel pump, and you know how that looks.
So if you have a supercharger without an intercooler on an engine, the life of that engine is most likely going to be cut in half?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it'd be cut in half
You're just
at all.
not going to get the performance out of it, correct? From that supercharger or turbocharger.
Well, again, I've never seen an intercooler on a supercharger. Never even heard of one. They bolt right on, right into the intake. So no, I don't think they ever made intercoolers for superchargers. Don't know. They make them for turbochargers. Yes. Not most airplanes. I would say most aircraft. No, I don't know. Most of the ones I worked on did not have an intercooler. That seems to be more of a Continental seems to put them on a lot more common. No, over here is one of the turbo controllers right there. You can see it hanging out up there. All right, so let me see. We'll just go with this slide. I'll come back to it later. But just so you understand the basic operating principle of the whole thing. So air comes in, we know that, goes into the engine works, exhaust gases come out. The exhaust gases are going to get to a point and they go one of two ways. They can go out the wastegate, this is called the Y, and they go through the Y, out the wastegate and do nothing, or as the wastegate closes, it forces it across the turbine wheel. Turbine wheel, of course, you know how that works. Turbine wheel is going to in turn turn the compressor. The compressor then compresses the air that goes into the engine. So it kind of helps it back and forth. One helps the other. That was a weird thing to say. But anyway, we'll get into that. So the more the wastegate is closed, the more turbine wheel gets the exhaust, the more it drives the compressor. So this wastegate right here, we're gonna talk a lot about it. That's the throttling device for that right there. All right. The turbocharger, it is an exhaust gas driven compressor. And we're just going to hit these words one more time. So we have a turbo normalizer. Turbo normalizer. It does not boost the manifold pressure above 30. We have a turbo supercharger. Or did I say charged? It's turbo supercharged. It's turbo supercharged, then it boosts the manifold. It does boost manifold pressure above 30 inches. Not all manufacturers use the word turbo supercharged. Some just say it's turbocharged. You know, well, is it boosted or not? And it's just, you just have to know the aircraft and know if it's going to do that.
You hear that too, right?
So Zach, what are you up to? You playing games or are you actually driving around?
Is a turbo on his computer.
Oh, okay. That's his turbo noise.
Oh yeah, when you showed the picture with the wastegate on it, I immediately thought of this this video I saw with a turtle who makes this noise every time they shift.
Oh.
And I saw it. I watched it.
Okay, the map, also called the manifold absolute pressure. Or MP for manifold pressure. Manifold pressure. All right, and then we're going to talk about a lot. Let me see. We'll just say manifold pressure, manifold absolute pressure. I want to be careful here. I always say this. Okay, we'll say this is the pressure in the intake system. Pressure in the intake manifold. The intake manifold. Throttle to cylinders. Throttle to cylinders. Yeah, I like that. All right, and then we're going to talk about upper deck pressure. Upper deck pressure will be defined as pressure from compressor outlet Sorry, I got an extra pen mark. Outlet to throttle plate. To the throttle plate. So if I looked at this particular picture, from here to here is the what?
From where to where?
The intake.
That'd be your map, right? Your manifold air pressure. Or manifold absolute pressure.
That's manifold pressure?
Manifold absolute, yeah. Well, no, it wouldn't be your absolute, but it'd be your MP, your manifold pressure.
No, your manifold pressure comes after the turbo.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
MJ says ambient. Sure, why not?
Oh,
It's not the best answer so far. So, pan out. So the divider was the throttle plate.
Yeah.
So number one, I said we have something that is the pressure from the intake manifold throttle to cylinders. What did I say was throttle to cylinders?
Manifold pressure.
Yeah, this is the manifold pressure here. Okay, what is it from this to here?
Upper deck pressure.
Upper deck. There you go. That's my upper deck is in there. And then here, air intake is just, I don't know, intake.
Ambient.
Call it intake. I don't know. No. All right. So we got upper deck is also called turbo outlet pressure. And then manifold is past here. And the reason why there's a very, very important distinction between the two is because when this throttle plate is partially closed, it is restricting the compressor output. So the compressor, it could be going like crazy, especially if I'm at idle. We could have the wastegate closed and we could be, the turbo is working as hard as it can to put as much pressure as we can in here. And it's doing its best, but yet you may have the throttle closed, which limits the manifold almost back down to a vacuum, or to a vacuum actually, because it's really limiting the amount of air that's getting through, and it's a suction. So the still is down at an idle, so it's still a vacuum. So you can have a vacuum in the manifold with some sort of turbine output, which is a higher upper deck. So you got to keep those things kind of straight. Discard. All right, upper deck pressure.
So the upper deck is right after the compressor and before.
Compressor, yeah, we could call it compressor outlet, but then
Yeah.
civilians would know what we're talking about, and we wouldn't be cool. So we call it upper deck. Now civilians have no idea what we're talking about, right?
What are you drinking?
The same thing I drink every day: peach tea.
Okay, never mind. It looks like something else for a
Peach.
second.
Is that what you call it?
It's what I call it. Well, peach tea, peach schnapps. I mean, it's peach. Some peach. All right, you guys all good here? Who would I gotta? All right,
It is peachy.
That was good, Hector.
All right, moving on. What is the purpose? Let's put all this together. Purpose of all of this. The purpose of turbochargers, superchargers is to increase the manifold pressure, the MAP, manifold pressure above the pressure of the atmosphere, Now, is that always true?
No.
No,
No.
Okay, what's the exception?
the turbo normalizer.
Okay, so the exception would be a turbo normalizer on the ground. Remember, as soon as I start going up in altitude, which is the whole purpose of the aircraft, I'm going to start leaving behind that sea level air, and I need the turbo. So really at that point, once I leave the ground, then this is true. You do want it to increase the manifold pressure above the pressure of the atmosphere, because the pressure of the atmosphere is suddenly becoming a lot lower as you go up. And that's what it's there for. So that is its purpose. Now it just happens to be set for 30 inches. So if you don't need the 30 inches, then, or if you're already getting it, then it's fine. But above that, once you start climbing up in altitude, you lose the pressure, and the turbocharger is supposed to increase the manifold pressure above the pressure of the atmosphere. That's its job. All right, and why do I do that? To increase horsepower. To increase horsepower. Sometimes it may do it on the ground. So on the ground, and that'd be for ground boosted. Ground boosted, or at altitude, Oh, I just messed that all up. At altitude, for a ground boost, for both ground boosted, or normalized, engines. All right, so increase the manifold pressure. How we increase the manifold pressure? So because we want to increase the weight of the, well, I will say fuel air mixture delivered to the engine. And as I said before, increased pressure means increased weight. Or I could have said the other way around since I said weight there, but hopefully you get the idea. All right. And by doing so, do we increase the compression ratio?
Yeah.
I got a yes.
No.
Because you're increasing the pressure, increasing the rate, so you're going to.
Nope, we are not increasing the compression ratio. Compression ratio, remember, is the difference between the volume of the cylinder at top dead center versus bottom dead center, bottom versus top.
Right, yeah.
We're not changing the ratio. Ratio stays the same. But we're putting more air into there so we can increase the volumetric efficiency. That's different. All right. Let's see. This does, though, increases the compression pressure, not the ratio, just the raw pressure. So the compression ratio is constant. That doesn't change. The only way you can change that is by changing the piston or the crankshaft or a rod length. So the greater the pressure, the greater, this is all review, hopefully. The greater the pressure in the cylinder, at, we'll say BDC, bottom dead center, or the beginning of the intake stroke. Obviously, the greater the pressure at TDC, at the compression stroke. And that was because of, as we already said, well, not because of, but why does it matter? Because of Planck, which is pressure, the stroke, length of stroke in feet, the area of the piston, and the RPM and number of cylinders. So if you increase any one of those, the pressure, the stroke, the area of the piston, RPM, or the cylinders, you get more power. And as we already know, we cannot change the stroke because it is built into the engine. Unless you have one of the new Nissans that do that. I shouldn't have said Nissan. What's the Nissan luxury version? The Infiniti. They have variable stroke engines. You cannot change the area of the piston, even if you have a Nissan. You cannot change the number of the cylinders, although Cadillac, I think, and several manufacturers, Cadillac started that, but not in the engines, aircraft engines. So that's left with, we can only do two things to manage our horsepower as a pilot, and that is pressure or RPM. And if we bolt on a turbocharger, supercharger, we can adjust the pressure. And if we spin it faster, we can get RPM, but we can only spin it so fast because of what limiting factor?
The propeller?
Yep, there you go. Propeller can only spin so fast. Or we start to go subsonic, or transonic, and then that's going to create pressure problems, which are going to make the tips go away. And then you get a tip depart light comes on, and then it shakes.
Oh, MJ, he mentioned a good idea in the notes. Couldn't you put a reduction gear before the propeller then?
Sure can. Then you can spin the engine faster, but you can only spin it as fast as the propeller is. Then you'd have to change reduction gear again. So you'd have to put some sort of, I suppose at some point you could actually put like a transmission in there, you know, first gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear.
But if the
badass.
If the propeller is spinning at a certain RPM though, how do you get more power to the propeller if it can only spin at a certain RPM? Like,
Well,
what
there
is?
you go. you max out on your RPM. So once you hit, so like 2,700 is a pretty fair bet for most propellers. Once you hit 2,700, that's it. You can't spin that prop any faster. So you're done. And we can take like the GO300, which has both the O300. It's like the O300. They just took that engine and then put a reduction gear and they spin it. I don't know, not a whole lot faster, but it's like 1 1/4 faster, something like that. So they spin the engine faster. They do get more horsepower out of it, and the propeller turns the same RPM.
So,
Right.
But the idea is to keep the same pressure on altitude, right?
Right. Okay. So my point with RPM is you're going to run out. You're very, very limited. As we're going to see soon enough, propellers are only, especially fixed pitch. No, you can't add more blades. That doesn't do any good. The more blades you add, the less efficient the propeller gets. You're going to see just how complex propellers are and how temperamental they are.
my question is, what's the difference? I mean, I don't really understand why you would have more power. Let's say your engine at 100 horsepower, spinning the propeller at 2,800 RPM.
Okay.
You're only going to get so much out of that same size propeller, even if you have an engine that's got 300 horsepower. What's the difference? That's what I want to know. Like, why more horsepower if you're only going to spin the propeller at the same RPM and it's only going to do the same amount of work, I would think.
Well, that's why you go from a constant speed or from a fixed pitch to a constant speed, right?
Well, now let's back up and look at this question here. When we're talking strictly engines, forget about the propeller, right? We're just trying to get shaft horsepower out of this thing. So how do we get more shaft horsepower? It's plank. You got to do one of these things. You have to increase one of these things to get more power out of the engine. Just end of story, right? And so what I'm saying, my idea, and everybody in aviation agrees with me, is that you can only spin the propeller so fast because the propeller loses efficiency. That's a propeller problem. So that limits how fast I can spin the engine. Take it now, example in your car, right? What is the limiting factor in your car? It's really RPM and what the engine can handle before it starts to eat itself to pieces. But if it wasn't for that, you could just increase the RPM instead of redlining it at 7,000, well, redline it at 50,000. You know, you'd have all kinds of horsepower. Instead of a 7 or 9 speed transmission, just put in a 30 speed and you just keep going. Would that work? That wouldn't work. I got off on something there that probably wouldn't work well. But anyway, just spin the engine faster. You wouldn't need more gears. Just spin it the hell faster. All right, but in aircraft we can't do that because the prop limits it. In cars you can't do that because just the engine will eat itself up if you go too fast. All right, so that leaves us with pressure. So if we can boost the pressure, we get more horsepower, which is what you're seeing now out of all of the cars that are being made, right? So like I was looking at replacing my car at one point, and my car has a naturally aspirated V6. They don't even make that anymore. The only thing I can get for that is a 4-cylinder turbocharged. So they're making the engine smaller and smaller and smaller and putting more and more pressure in them. So they're making the stroke smaller, the area of the piston smaller, and the number of cylinders went down. So this went down, this went down, this went down, and the horsepower did go down a little bit. So, but to try and keep it almost the same horsepower, what do? They're going to spin these engines faster, and they're going to boost the pressure up so that it all equals out.
Basement or
520, by the way.
What's that?
520, by the way.
520. All right. In fact, I wonder what 520 was all about. I was thinking IO 520. What is this IO 5? All right. Well, then I'll see you guys in a little bit.
Yep.